Yeah, I'm talking today a little bit about Samba running that beast on AIX. And yeah, those who don't know me, I'm a Samba team member since many years, and for even more years, almost 20 years, I'm working for Zernet. And yeah, in the past, many years ago, before we had our current CI infrastructure and the SN Devil machine, I was also maintaining many of the Unix machines in our build farm. Yeah, that build farm, it was a composition of many different machines, different Unix machines, different Linux distributions. And whenever someone committed a new patch to the Samba source code, that was being compiled on all the machines, including the Unix machines. And so in those years, Samba was really, really great in portability. It was around Samba 3.6, I think, when Samba was really one of the most portable pieces of software you could find, I think. After that, we moved our infrastructure to a new provider, and along with that, we got our SN Devil machine to run automatic compiles, and at the same time also the build farm unfortunately broke and was never reanimated again. So from that point on, the portability of Samba was getting worse and worse, unfortunately. So we became much more Linux focused since then. Okay, so nowadays, are there any Unix flavors around anymore? Most people probably don't see much Unix machines. And actually, it's true. Linux is the most popular Unix-like system out there. There are also still some BSD machines, especially FreeBSD, but all those commercial Unix flavors like AIX, first of all, then True64, HP, Unix, they all died more or less a couple of years ago. And also Solaris, I wouldn't say that Solaris is completely dead yet, but it's almost dead, I would say. It had some enthusiastic fans, and it suffered very, very much from its current, or from its previous owner, Sun, who never really understood how open source really works. They wanted to put Solaris in a kind of open source world, but they didn't understand how that thing works. And yeah, after Sun was taken over by Oracle, okay, of course, I don't have to say anything about that. Yeah, I found this this cover of the Byte magazine when I was searching for some nice graphics here for the presentation, and I liked it very much. It says, "Is Unix dead?" And why should Unix be dead in the year 1992? Because Windows NT comes. Well, yes. Okay, there is another nice quote, which is from Rob Pike. Not only Unix is dead, it's starting to smell really bad. In case somebody doesn't know who Rob Pike is, He's one of those who were working at the Bell Labs, and he was a member of the Unix team. So he is one of the fathers of the good old Unix. And later on, he also worked on Plan 9, the supposed to be successor of Unix. And while he was working on Plan 9, he was actually also designing the UTF-8 standard. Yeah, so he's a really brilliant mind, and we wouldn't be sitting here if he wouldn't have done what he did in the past. Okay, so almost all the Unix flavors are dead. We saw that already, but I think that AIX is actually still quite alive. AIX 7, at least, is that what distributions nowadays call rolling release. So all the 7.x releases, they are binary compatible to each other. And if you compile a piece of software for AIX 7, then it should be running on all the other AIX 7.x releases. Yeah, Linux distribution nowadays try to sell this as a cool new feature, but actually IBM invented this already long ago. Yeah, part of that, IBM's AIX doesn't have a lot of sexy glitter stuff, bells and whistles. This is why many people think that it is not so powerful or so, I don't know. But actually it is quite powerful, I have to say. And unlike Solaris, that used to have many fanboys in the last couple of years, I think nowadays it doesn't have so many either. AIX never had so many fanboys who are running around and say how cool their system is. Yeah, maybe IBM should hire some of those guys. Yeah, actually, it is a quite mature and stable operating system from what I can say. Okay, who uses AIX actually? First of all, you have to see that AIX is quite expensive, or let's better say the hardware is quite expensive that you need to run AIX on, the power architecture. And so only companies who have a lot of money to afford buying that hardware is able to run AIX. And yeah, the next big step that people who want to use it have to take is the stuff that they need to do to register and to set up all the things on the websites of IBM. I was doing that a couple of years ago for our power machine, and I was close to getting to a hospital because I was really this stuff on the IBM websites was really driving me crazy. It's yeah, terrible. And yeah, companies who used AIX in the past and who had been happy with it Probably also like using AIX in the future. One of the advantages of AIX is that you don't have to learn how to configure and to maintain your system from scratch every 2 years or so, like it is with most of the Linux distributions. Open source on AIX. Yeah, you can run a lot of open source software on AIX, but it's not that easy to do because open source software is usually only tested and developed on Linux machines, sometimes also on BSD machines, but almost never on AIX machines. IBM offers some packages for free in the AIX toolbox, but if you install those packages, then you will also realize that even if the package was successfully compiled, it's unfortunately not always as bug-free as you wish that it should be. Let's say it like that. So yeah, finding the favorite tools that you usually use every day on AIX isn't that easy, actually. The same applies also for Samba. We had many customers in the past who were trying to run Samba on AIX, and they haven't been very happy with those packages that were available for free, for example, from Bull freeware in the past, who were offering free packages for AIX. And yeah, in 2020, we actually started also, because we had several requests from customers, to provide our Samba Plus packages also for AIX. And yeah, people can since then get fully supported AIX binaries with full commercial support also, which is a big step forward from what was possible in the years before. The package installation with those Samba Plus packages is quite different from most of the packages that you can find for AIX. For example, the toolbox packages from IBM, they are RPM based. The native packages from IBM, they have that native LPB format, and we didn't like both of them. Actually, we decided just to ship a tarball, which contains everything that is needed to run the Samba binaries. And that one also contains all the libraries and dependent files that are required, so that you don't have to install any third-party packages to run Samba on AIX now. You just run that setup shell script and make a symlink, and that's all, basically. So now some secret hints what you should do before actually starting running a Samba server on AIX. Historically, AIX just allowed 64 groups per user. This was when AIX 5 was the actual version. With AIX 6, they raised the number of groups per user to 128 already. And with AIX 7, finally, you can raise the maximum number of groups that are allowed to 2048. And this is actually also a step that you should do right from the beginning. So first, I suggest run this query command here to see what your current default n groups allowed value is. Probably it's 128. And you should raise it to the maximum 2048, so that you will not run into problems when you join an Active Directory and you have users with many group memberships. And even if you think that the user has only a quite limited number of group memberships, then there might still be groups and groups, so that the actual number of group memberships is higher than it looks like at the first glance. Okay, then there's another setting that you should change. Also for historic reasons, AIX had a maximum username limit of 8 characters. 8 characters is, of course, very little. And luckily, you can also raise this value to much higher. The maximum is 256. And you should raise that limit also to that value. This is a very important point. After you did the previous 2 changes, raising those limits, you should really reboot your system. So if you have a workload partition or run Samba on bare metal AIX, then you should reboot or IPL the host. If you're running a logical partition, you should reboot the LPAR. If you don't do that, those changed values are not getting effective. And it's very likely that you will run into that limit, and it will not be very obvious that you hit the limit. So I really recommend do that reboot. I just had a customer 2 weeks ago, I think, who also thought, oh, I don't need that reboot. I'm not running into that limit. And of course, he was running into that limit. And yeah, just do the reboot. I know rebooting is a scary thing, especially if you're a Unix administrator and you haven't rebooted your machines in the last 5 years or so. It's risky, but just do it. And yeah, have a look before if your serial console is still connected, so that you can get access to the machine if the reboot is causing any trouble or so. I've also seen that. Okay, after you did all that and you successfully booted the machine, you need to configure those things which are on a Linux box, nswitch.conf and pum. nswitch.conf is on AIX, the etc methods.cfg, and you need to put those Winbind modules here. And if you also want to use authentication on the system, authentication on the shell, not via SMB. Via SMB, you don't need the last change here. But for shell authentication, you also need to run this sec command to enable also the Winbind authentication. Right. Then there are some more enhanced OS settings. You should, I suppose that you are using JFS2 if you have a AIX7 box, which is JFS2 is the default on AIX7. And you should make sure that EAV2 support is enabled so that you can actually use extended attributes on the file system. And another benefit is that you can use NFS4 ACLs then. Using NFS4 ACLs is a very, very nice thing. The Linux administrators dream of that, but Linux probably won't get NFS4 ACLs in the next couple of years because the maintainers of the Linux kernel don't like them. But it's a very cool thing because the NFS4 ACLs are actually the only standardized ACL implementation. Those POSIX draft RCLs that Linux still uses, they have never been standardized. And the draft was also withdrawn, and instead the NFS4 ACL was the final standard, which was decided. And the NFS4 ACLs also allow you to store quite exactly the same information bits that Windows Server also stores. So NT-ACLs and NFS4 ACLs, they are one-to-one mappable. So for a Samba server, this is a super nice feature. Okay, that was more or less that part which was AIX specific. Now let's have a look how standard smb.conf would look like for a member server that we will join to an Active Directory in the next step. So we have here the realm set and the NetBIOS host name, security equals ADS, which means we are member server in an Active Directory. We have an IDmap configuration for the default domain, which means all the domains which are not explicitly differently defined, like our AD domain here, which I decided to configure with a RID backend and a range of 100,000 to 199,999. Yeah, so this is a quite minimal smb.conf for a member server. And in the next step, before we join, you should check that your host name is correct, that your IP address is correct, and that the name servers, the DNS servers that you're using are correct, because all those things are important when you join the Active Directory now. And better also make sure that there is no SMBD or Winbind process running anymore, also not maybe from a previous installation or so. That happens from time to time, and it causes some weird effects. So just make sure that they are stopped. Yeah, and then finally join the domain with a netads join -u administrative account command. And if you did everything that we talked about before correct, then you should get a message that you joined the AD successfully. And if you did that, then you can start the Winbind daemon. And what we're going to do then, before we start the SMBD, we're going to check that the Winbind daemon is actually doing what it should do and test a couple of things. So you can run, for example, wb info -t, which will check the connectivity to the domain controller and that it's correctly joined. If this is working correctly, then you have already half of your job done. Next thing you need to check is the Winbind module, which you put in the methods CFG file before. That should be working also now if the Winbind daemon is working correctly. And what you can do here, this is the ls user command is actually the equivalent of the get and passwd command on Linux machines. So get and passwd AD administrator would be the same like the ls user AD administrator here. And if that is successful, it should output you something like you see here on the bottom. Yeah, and then finally you can start the SMBD daemon. But you should really make sure that the Winbind daemon is running successfully, because if something is wrong with if something is wrong with a Winbind daemon, then SMBD has no chance to work probably either. Okay. Then before starting the SMBD, just add a small test share, like this, for example, here, to the smb.conf. And then just start the SMBD with the init script. And after that, you should be able to access the machine with a Windows client. And I suggest just create a directory or so, and also have a look how the permissions and ownerships look like in the /tmp directory. And it should have those AD domain prefixed in front of the usernames, just like here in the output of the ls user command that we saw before. Okay, and last but not least, if you're an AIX administrator, forget limitations from 30 years ago or so. With AIX 7, you have a really modern file system and a modern operating system, and you should make use of it. There is no need to create users in the etc parsw file or so. You can just use Winbind to let the users being created automatically. I suggest also make use of NFS4 ACLs. Most people I've seen who are running Samba servers, they just don't like ACLs at all, I think. And they don't know that NFS4 ACLs exist, I think. Actually, I think if you are running a file server on AIX, you have much more possibilities with ACLs than on a Samba file server on Linux. So really forget about the limitations of the past. Just be brave and use the modern features of the operating systems that are available, actually. All right, that was it.